Thank you very much, Scott. That was really thought-provoking. I can't really summarise what he's said other than to say one thing that did stand out was the fact that you've worked with 17 regulators on digital Know Your Customer, and not one of them insists on the handwritten signature. You know, people often criticise regulators for holding back innovation, but that's a prime example of where it's the banks themselves that can't get out of that mindset. It's now time for our next session, which is a panel session. Could we have our panelists up on stage, please? Except Elias Araktingi, he needs to get mic'd up first. You've got a mic? Yep. So if you just go over to the far corner, we've been wondering where you are, but now we know. You need to get a lapel mic. But could we have Asad Battler up on stage, please, and take one of these seats, and also Dominique Corradi. I like to seat them in alphabetical order. So. The observant among you will notice that all the names on the agenda are in alphabetical order, and they should tally with the names that come up here. So at any point, if you're wondering who's talking, you just look at your programme and they're seated alphabetically, apart from me, of course. I'll be on the end here. This is going to be all about digital banking, the digital revolution, new strategies for forward-thinking bank leaders. And yes, that's right, that one there, yes. I'm now going to take my seat and introduce our panellists. Now, I hope my lapel mic's on. It's on here. Can you turn up the volume? Is that working? No? So please put... I'll stand here until the sound system's working on this mic here. First, we have Elias Araktingi, who's General Manager Retail Banking, Blom Bank from Lebanon. He's been in this role since 2013, and he's been with the bank since 1995, when he joined in 1995 as an advisor to the chairman. He's based in Lebanon, as I say, but for much of his time at Blom, he worked in Cairo, Egypt. I think this is this working now? Yep, it is, yes. Good. I hope so. Then we have Asad Battler, who's Head of Consumer Banking, Bank Nizwa from Oman. Bank Nizwa is Oman's first Islamic bank, and before joining the bank, he worked at Noah Islamic Bank here in the UAE. In his 20 years of banking, he's worked for quite a number of international banks, including Citibank, ANZ, and Barclays, and in many different countries, including Pakistan, South Korea, and Australia. And at the far end, we have Dominique Corradi, who is Middle East Digital Financial Services Leader for EY, also based in the UAE. Dominique only joined the firm this year. He previously worked for PwC and IBM and has got 18 years consulting experience for financial institutions in the UK, Europe, India, Middle East, and North Africa. And we were going to have somebody from Accenture from the UK, David Parker. He's named in your brochure, but unfortunately he had to pull out at the last moment. Looks like we have a sound problem. All right, I hope we're all set. The format of this session is pretty much standard for a panel session. We did have 40 minutes. I'm going to have to cut it a little bit short, but we'll still got about 30, 35 minutes. I'll ask our panelists a few questions to get a discussion going, and then about halfway through, I'll invite you, the audience, to ask some questions as well. We'll start with Elias. The first question is a key question in this discussion, so I'm going to ask each panellist to answer it, and they're going to make some opening remarks as well. So I've given them 2 or 3 minutes each to set out their stall, if you like. So Elias from Blom Bank, question is this: how are you using digital banking to improve the customer experience and also increase revenues, cut costs, and deliver shareholder value?
Yes. Let me see. Is it working?
Yes, well? It is, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Basically, the good news for us and for many banks in the Middle East is we don't have to do a lot of innovation. We already know what we need to do. So it's more of a challenge of execution than a challenge of innovation. Mm-hmm. You have to build a lot of functionality in your systems. So currently you have quite a lot of procedures And the challenge is to put all of these procedures into the digital world. Then you have to increase your capacity to support all of this additional functionality like call centers, technical support, etc. And then you have to do a lot of work in marketing to get your customers to adopt these technologies. Now, once you do all of that, and that's a lot of investment, I don't think you will have immediately a big return on investment, because what will happen is that while the customers will use a lot these new technologies, they will continue to use branches because of all the challenges posed by regulations, etc. And so I think right now we're going into a phase of a lot of investment.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And Asad, what's your take on this? What's your bank doing in the digital banking arena?
I think a lot can be achieved through small changes, and we don't have to look for revolutionary changes every day, because we as bankers don't get up in the morning and say, what is innovation today? We just end up, Sound. Now can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, it is working, but the volume's a bit low.
I'll probably try to hold the mic like this. All right. We as bankers don't get up in the morning and think about revolutionizing the industry. We end up facing the challenge day to day from these new entrants, and then we're probably trying to defend ourselves. So in defense, what we end up doing, particularly, for example, when we entered Oman market, I tried to open an account in another bank. It took 15 days to apply, to get a checkbook, to get a debit card. So what we ended up doing was actually making a simple change, instant issuance, which is at the branch. So no need for a long process to apply application, go to the central processing unit, issue a checkbook, and send it through courier, very expensive methodology. Customer walks in, customer gets his checkbook, customer gets his personalized debit card. So these are the changes that we all bankers can do every day, today's available technology. We have straight-through processing, which we can use to give customer the experience of having information stored and also computed to give customers the solutions immediately. So internet banking today actually should be looked at straight-through processing rather than just having a front interface and just having a customer to apply. And at the bank end, 10 people actually employed to actually resolve customer problems. So today, what we have to do is look at straight-through processing to cut costs and actually enhance bank revenues. And some of the banks are doing it well, but some of the banks are taking a bit of a long time. So that's my take on small changes that we can do to make the change. Yeah.
Okay, that's all very clear. Microphone accepting, but I think your mic's okay now. Dominique, what's your view on this?
Well, my view and also the outcomes of a survey that we've conducted within EY, within the GCC, where we've interviewed 80 leaders at 30 banks.
Sorry,
and
what's
also
the
2,000
survey
customers.
called?
Sorry?
What's the survey or the report called?
So it is a GCC digital banking survey that we've just completed, and which is released today. And we've interviewed 80 bankers at 30 institutions, 2,000 customers, and also we've carried a sentiment analysis of more than 1 million posts that were on the social network. So first thing is about what do banks expect from digital? I mean, the benefit that you've named, and it's very easy. And by large, it came that it is about enabling the delivery of the growth agenda, and this is really the very top priority that's been identified. So through salary acquisitions, through increased customer loyalty by getting better customer journeys, by getting the existing customer to spend more at their banks by additional convenience, and also by capturing a share of this huge remittance market that we do have within the GCC. So how can they do that through digital? It's about getting 4 elements right at the same time. The engagement technologies, which is basically the mobile app or the online banking or all these, let's say, frontline technologies, the infrastructure, which is the core banking, the process automations, and so forth, but also the assets and the know-how, of the banks, which is made of the value propositions that they can have through digital, the customer journeys as well, the data, and so forth. And last one, which is probably the most important that we've talked about, which is the innovation capabilities of the bank itself. In reality, what we've seen is that banks are focused on the first two ones, which are more like the technology part, and which is dragging most of the resources and the management attentions to the expense of real customer value, which is delivered through the two latest ones. So our recommendation would be invest in your digital assets and enable and foster innovation.
Okay, thanks for that. Does your survey cover the threat to traditional banks from new entrants? Not when I say new entrants, I mean the challenger banks and also the non-bank payment providers. Have you done any work on that?
Yes, traditionally banks in the region were quite well protected by the regulator. And first, and second, there were not a huge amount of competition compared to other regions in the world. So what is changing is probably a combination of three elements. So first one, which is the emergence of new banks. I mean, quite recently, new Islamic venture were created, and we can see now in the market having lots of maybe smaller banks or more recent banks, but which do not have any legacy, which makes them a lot more agile. A second one, which is some bilateral agreements in between countries, Qatar and Saudi, Kuwait and Bahrain, all these countries having some bilateral agreement, which is easing, the establishment of foreign operations, within the region. And the third one is also a greater focus on this international remittance market that I've talked about, which is actually generating some attention and to attract new actors.
Mm-hmm. On this subject, Assad, of challenger banks, you're quite a new bank. Would you describe yourself as a challenger bank? You're a new entrant?
Yeah, we challenge in two ways. We challenge the banks in terms of just being new in the market and actually, for example, older banks have core banking technology and credit card systems and all payment systems they bought probably 15, 20 years ago and they have been enhancing. When we went in, I mean, I've worked for the international giant and then smaller banks. Today's the technology is, let's say, $2 million versus a $10 million banking system in the old days, and that had to be, customized. And today, if you try to change it, it'll take you longer. And these are not user-friendly systems. A lot of banks that have had legacy systems. So in a way, due to the timing of entry to the market, we've had the advantage of having robust systems, but we still lie in the older way of thinking of banking technology. However, it is faster for us. So that's the technology front and the new processes and systems that we can adapt to quickly resolve customers' problems. But the other part, the Islamic structures, are actually based on the customer acceptability. Islamic structures are being preferred more and more in the world of mostly around Middle East and Islamic countries, and that is giving us a bit of an advantage. Where there's a disadvantage to the new entrant is actually the longer it takes on the documentation side of Islamic finance and Islamic banking. So we have a mixed bag. We have a new technology, but we do have longer systems. So we have ways that we have devised where the customer documentation is made through easier on straight through processing basis and on internet banking, where they can accept their terms and conditions online. So these are the challenges we are facing. But based on your question, what's happening with banks, it's more important to see is what's happening to banks versus the new entrants like PayPal, Zap. We are more like a centralized system governed by central banks, following policies, following the rule of land as well as the world of banking. Whereas the new entrants like PayPal, etc., didn't have to, in like our previous presentation, they're like a new kid on the block. They don't consider rules as same as us.
Yeah, but Dominique pointed out that the new entrants that are non-bank financial institutions do have regulatory hoops to jump through. The regulators protect the domestic banking sector. So is that the same in Oman?
It is, but however, I'm just talking about the facts simply. They also see a gap that the bank's technology or the old processes don't allow. For example, PayPal. Why is PayPal so successful? I got them into one of my forums, and we actually grilled the PayPal guys. What did you see as a gap? They said, you banks, when you did not consider security, why your customers were not using credit cards on internet banking? Because you did not have adequate security. The moment the customer used their credit card, it got stolen, and that hangover from cyber threat and cyber stealing actually protects, stops customers from doing it. Well, today 3D and all the securities have come in, whereas PayPal came in. You got to open an email account. You store the credit card. It's democracy at the customer level. You store the card value, the card number in their account. When PayPal pays, PayPal settles. So there's no card number exchange. So as simple as that, these new entrants are seeing the gaps in what is left behind by our inability due to our secured systems is what they're taking advantage of.
Yeah.
So the new entrants are threatening and taking billions of dollars out of payments.
Understood. I'd like to ask Elias about his view on this, because you're a traditional bank. I don't know how old is Blom Bank? How many years?
55 years.
50, yeah. So, do you feel threatened by new entrants? Bank in Israel is still only in Oman, but new entrants that are banks, and then the non-banking institutions. Is it a threat in your country?
I think we should separate between the threat of disruption and the sense of urgency. I think any bank that doesn't have a sense of urgency will see its lunch eaten by another bank or by somebody else. So definitely you need to have a sense of urgency. In terms of having a major disruption in the banking system, and specifically for Blom Bank, I don't see it happening. So if I take a little bit of the contrarian view, I used to be a consultant before I became a banker, and we always used to have a scarecrow that we would use in order to scare the banks into moving faster.
A scarecrow? What sort of scarecrow? A physical scarecrow?
No, it was always a threat like that. So when I started, I was in Thailand, and we used to go tell all the big Thai banks that the big players like Citibank and HSBC, etc., were going to come in and take over the Thai market. And of course, it never happened. The Thai banks are still doing very, very well. Even if I recall back in the 90s, in the early 90s, the chairman of a large Thai bank was worried about what Microsoft would be doing in its market, and it never happened. But that doesn't mean you should stay immobile. You have to move forward. Otherwise, your neighboring bank will take over your business.
Okay, thanks. I've got a few more questions here, but I'd like to give the audience an opportunity to ask some questions. I've got my specs on now. I need these for long distance, but I can't see if I've got them on here. I need bifocals. So put your hand up if you have any questions for our panelists, and we'll get a roving mic to you. No questions yet? Well, put your thinking caps on, because I'll give you another opportunity in a few moments. Moving on to our next question, which is, what does a winning electronic banking strategy look like? Where does social media fit in? Will cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin ever take off and become mainstream? Dominique, do you have any views on that?
Yes, I mean, the outcomes of the survey, once again, it's quite clear. One of the main challenges and the strategy that banks should put in place is just, first one is about increasing the agility. Most of them know how to deliver an 18-month core banking transformation, but cannot do a 4 weeks mobile app upgrade. Or they can develop it in 4 weeks, but then it will take 6 months to test it and to make it working all right. So agility is really key within mobile. Then the second one is about innovation. So, I mean, the connection in between the idea, capturing the idea, incubating the idea, and putting it into place is also something which is really critical. The third one is about the value propositions. We can see quite often some functionalities which are provided and which are launched, but which are not directly connected to a very strong value proposition. And therefore, in this case, it usually just adds complexity and confusion for the users. You spoke about social medias. We've evidenced on the survey that up to 66% of the customers were actually connected to social medias and were using social media before taking financial decisions. And usually banks are not part of it. I mean, they do have a presence on social media, but it's more for marketing, and they're not considered as providing thought leadership on social media. So this is one space that needs to be used by banks as well. There is also something which is about data. Put your data to use. I mean, when I go to a bank, when I go to my bank, to my ATM, you know, I just take my debit card, I put it within the machine, and I want to get cash. And the first question which is asked by the ATM is, what's your preferred language? Come on, I'm banking with the same institution for more than 5 years, and you're still asking me what is my preferred language. It hasn't changed, you know, indeed. So, I mean, banks do have loads of data about the customers, but there is a frustration from the customer about how this data is used for their own benefits. Then,
Okay, I'd like to just move on to Elias now. I've got a pretty good idea of what your views are on that. And Elias, within the general question of what does an electronic banking strategy look like, I'd like to ask you specifically about social media.
Okay.
In the UK and Europe and the US, we know it's a big thing, but in Lebanon, is it?
Yeah, it is a big
there?
thing also. It's great to reach your non-customers, and it's great to explain complex things to the customers. But we haven't found it relevant specifically to our efforts today to move our customer base into digital. That hasn't happened yet. Now, in terms of winning strategy, if you want me to talk about it, I think it should be multifaceted. So it should cover all kinds of areas in the organization, not just the technical area or the technology, but also marketing, branches, capacity, pricing, etc. And I think in order to have a winning strategy, you have to have some kind of dictatorship, because there's a lot to do, and you have a lot of competing priorities. And if you look at the organization, every person is going to have their own views of what the priority should be. So you need to have somebody at the top who is really driving very hard.
Okay. Before we move on, has anybody thought of a question? I know there's 300 people in the room, or thereabouts. Okay, look, gentleman at the back. Now, do we have a roving mic? There's a microphone coming over to you. A long way to travel, but she's on her way. And zipping in and out of the chairs and the tables. And could you just say your name and organisation that you represent, please?
Sure. My name is Nipun, and I'm from Deloitte. Hi, Dominic.
Hi, Nipun.
My question is to the panel in terms of you have spoken about use of social media and banking together. Can you give any instances where you have come across where banks have actually used social media in helping customers make decisions or being part of that decision-making process? And if not, and if you're seeing some steps being taken in that direction, where do you think the banks in this region, in Middle East, would take some strong actions in this? Because we have seen a lot of banks talk about this, but we have really not seen them get into the social media space and do something about this.
Okay, thanks for that. So essentially, how are banks using social media to win over customers and service them? Assad?
Yeah. I'll give you an example in Oman. There's a social media site, general site called Sabla. People talk about local debate in that forum. What they ask questions is very relevant questions about how services of institutions are being done. I've had an example of a telecom where they were asking a question, the other customers helped them how to get a solution which is cheaper and what they're looking for, and the customer wrote that he actually ended up doing it. We've been helped a lot. Customer were talking about Islamic banking, thinking that it was totally free, like Islamic banking, riba free means you don't pay any profit. So we helped them to structure products or in their fashion. We invited them to come to our branch or talk to us on the phone or any medium to resolve. So it's real. It's in every society. It's getting very real. These forums are. So don't pay attention to just your Facebook or your Twitter. Just pay attention to the general forums where people are talking about using products. So for bankers, my advice, at least we are taking that advice, to keep our eyes, our agency and our marketing people's eyes open on relevant consumer forums where they're talking about problems and solutions. So if I may, while I have the mic, quickly, electronic banking and social media looks like this in the future. It just looks like mobile banking. So if you've got it right here, it's not about the software. It's about everybody having it in their pocket. And if your digital banking, if your mobile banking solution is actually user-friendly, your customers are talking about. The example is we have 50,000 customers. We are a new bank. We had 1,700 internet banking customers over a year. The moment we launched mobile banking, 5,000 registrations in 3 days. That is what mobile banking is. I'm just giving you stats and experience, no emotion, no preference, just customers are choosing.
Pretty impressive figures. Elias, any examples of social media that you want to share with the audience?
We've done a lot of competitions on Facebook whereby we would describe a product and we would have a competition among our Facebook followers as to how to use that product. For example, we have designed cards on Facebook. We've made a competition and we've asked our customers, even non-customers, to design what is the best card, and then we'd had voting on these cards. Mm-hmm. So quite a few things you can do to explain products.
And Dominic, very briefly, because I want to see if there are any other questions out there. So in 30 seconds, if you could give your example, please.
Okay, so quickly, you're challenging me now. So social media is being used for two things from what we've seen. First is about protecting reputations. On that, banks are usually quite good, like to get alerts on everything which might actually affect their reputation. Servicing customers as well, like solving some problems, at least being aware of the problem and doing some actions. There is one area on which we've seen a certain level of frustration from customers, which is about the influence of banks actually on the market. Usually they still consider it as a channel for marketing rather than a real way of helping people to improve their financial literacy, which is not really the way it's being used right now, and we think that this is a gap.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions? There's a gentleman there, table at the front with a beard. And when you get the mic, could you tell us who you are, where you're from, please?
Yes, good morning. My name is Rebel Hanna. Actually, my question is based on the concept of the technology in the banking industry. Technology is first to meet the client's expectations, but the most important it is to exceed their expectations in order to add value and make a difference. To which extent do you believe that if we want to exceed the expectations of our clients, we are not limited by the global compliance requirements and the regulatory requirements? Can we exceed these expectations without being limited by the compliance and the regulatory requirements?
Right, so I think I'll start with Elias and we'll move down, but keep your answers brief, please. How can you exceed the expectations of customers with the technology offering?
Well, I think he has a good point. It's tough to exceed expectations when you have all these requirements, but these requirements also protect you as a bank, because that's also a cost of exit to your customer. So the customer, once he has a good relationship with the bank knows him, he's going to think twice about moving somewhere else where he has to do all this process one more time. Mm-hmm. So it's a mixed blessing.
Yeah, okay. Asad?
as long as the customer experiences across the channel very similar, so banks should think about processing customer queries, information, or account opening, whatever it is, in reality using technology properly, not just putting an interface up and then telling the customer you'll still have to wait 5 days that I'll answer your questions. That's not going to work anymore. The old ways of having a call center, putting a request through the operations doesn't work anymore. It has to be instant resolution of problems. That is what's going to exceed customer expectations. Today's world is very fast. It's mobile. They want an answer. They want a real person behind it or a real technology behind it. No more old ways of 5 days of running up through the hierarchy. So we need to decentralize a lot of decisions, a lot of solutions.
Okay, thanks, Asad. And Dominique?
Well, I do concur with what's just been said. Just to add something about the requirements and the regulatory requirements. So it's been named as one of the main reasons preventing innovation by the bankers and by the leaders that we've met. So we've decided actually to go to the regulator and get also the point of view of central banks. We haven't met yet Central Bank of the UAE, but we've met a couple of central banks within the GCC. And that's not the problem at all. I mean, usually what they are telling us is that the problem is about collaboration and that the bankers are just limiting themselves, to some functionality because they're just saying that this will never going to be accepted by the central bank. Or usually when they do request a new evolution or innovation, then usually it's not really well presented to the central bank, and the result is that this collaboration does not work very effectively. So we do recommend putting in place a very strong collaboration with central banks actually to enable these innovation and these customer journeys as well.
Okay, thanks, Dominique. We're just about out of time now, but what I'd like to do is I'd like each of the panelists to summarize in less than a minute your views on this topic, the main points that you would like the audience to take away from what you've said. Elias.
Well, in my first experience building the retail business at Blom Bank, we reached a point after we have finished with all the basics where the innovation came directly from the customers. You reach a certain point after you have completed your homework where suddenly the answers come to you naturally from the needs of your customers. And what I would like to leave is, if you finish all the basics that you need to do in terms of infrastructure, moving customers to digital, then you will see a lot of things you can do to innovate.
Okay, thank you. Asad?
I think the time has come that we recognize that there is a lot of collaboration that is required between finance and technology. FinTech is taking a lot of space of customer transactions. We need to collaborate with the central banks of our own countries to accept technologies that are safe. For example, if before blockchain and Bitcoin become the reality in a third party's hand, make it mainstream regulatory. Private ledgers should become a banker's day-to-day requirement to look into, where we set this centralization and decentralization. I'm not talking about banking controlling this, but actually the democracy that the customer needs instant solutions. Pay attention to it, sit with regulators, sit with technology, have forums, have innovation in a more regulated way before it gets out of hand and we lose money, not only in terms of revenues, but in terms of customers' deposits that we lose because of cyber threat, because of third parties that are developing and telling customers that it is a safe environment. Customers come in and lose money and then lose faith in the whole system. So we as bankers have the responsibility with regulators and with technology people to come up with solutions that help customers solve their problems.
Okay, thank you. And Dominique?
Well, in a nutshell, we are in a region which is quite unique in terms of the young population, in terms of high level of education, in terms of wealthy people. We do have a usage of mobile apps of 98%, and out of that, only 30-something percent are using banking mobile app. And all the customers that we've interviewed do understand the benefits, of this application in terms of helping them to reach, their financial goals, and they're willing to use it, but they don't because of convenience. And this is, the main conclusion that we had through this survey, which is that there is currently a lack of convenience that needs to be addressed very quickly in order to enable digital banking to really
Okay, thank you very much, Dominique, and Assad and Elias. We've had a good discussion, we had a few questions from the audience, so thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.